Every time me and Adam Chapman get together, we talk about Ron Frenz quite a bit. And he's like, my best friend, Ron Frenz.
You guys really need to get out more.
Boom. We are back, everybody. Welcome to the Omniverse Comics Guide podcast. I am your host, Eric Anthony. Special shout out to my co host, Dave, who makes me look very pretty on the YouTube and sound great on all of the podcast platforms that you might be listening to. Please rate and subscribe if you're listening on YouTube or on any other audio podcast that you prefer. As well, most importantly, visit us at omniversecomics.guide, where we have all of our interviews, our collector item specials, and of course, Dave's reading orders, which are second to none. There are a lot of good ones on the internet, but I think his are so meticulously detailed, you won't find one better. Check us out, omniversecomics.guide. Now, without further ado, today's guest is a creator that you've heard me speak about on the podcast quite often, someone that I'm very fond of. He's one of the most generous podcast guests when it comes to creators in the industry who gives us the goods on what was really going on and is generous with his time. It's none other than comic book legend, Mr. Ron Frenz. Thank you for coming to the Omniverse, Ron.
Eric, it's my pleasure, truly. Thank you very much for that introduction. This whole legend thing is odd. My partner Tom DeFalco has embraced it, but it
As you
still feels
should.
a little weird to me. But I thank you very much for all the kind words. I'm happy to
Listen,
be here.
when you've drawn professionally Spider-Man and Superman, and you can say, I've worked that long on these characters, as well as Thor and many, many others, you deserve the title of legend in the Hall of Famer. Can we say Hall of Famer? Is that fair?
I'm not in any official Hall of Fame, so I'll take the Hall of Fame of your heart. I
There you
will
go.
take that.
There you go. Perfect. We've chatted before, but this is your first time here in the Omniverse. So let's kind of do a little bit of a backstory, a little bit of how you fell in love with comics. Where did that begin for you?
Wow. I can't remember a time when I wasn't in love with comics. I have a brother 3 years older, and it may be apocryphal, but when we think back on it and we're trying to compare memories and everything, we came up with the first comic we remember would have been a 1964 World's Finest comic with Superman and Batman together. And he was 3 years older. In 1964, I only would have been four. He would have been 3 years older. What,
Seven.
seven? Yes. That's why I draw for a living. Um, and obviously, our folks bought it for us, and brought it into the house, and we were deep into the '66 Batman series and the Filmation Superman Aquaman Hour of Adventure and then come the '60s, '66, '67, I discovered Spider-Man from the cartoon and reading. Romita was on the book by then. The first ones I remember buying off the rack were by John Romita, and I never looked back. I just loved everything about cartoons and comics and newspaper strips, and I don't remember a time when I wasn't trying to draw what I was seeing. My dad was a paper salesman.
Hmm.
So there were always reams of 8.5 by 11 bond paper to draw on all over the house. And by God, I did, it's been a lifelong thing for me. I can't remember a time when I wasn't in love with the characters and the form. And I had my brother to grow up with, I mean, I was never made to feel ashamed of it. I was never made to feel like it wasn't a real career goal. From the time I was like 6 or 7 years old, if you asked little Ron Frenz what he wanted to do, it was I wanted to grow up. I wanted to work for Marvel Comics, and I wanted to draw the Amazing Spider-Man. And at 25, I was literally living that dream. And it's all been downhill from there. No, it's been a wonderful, wonderful ride. 40 years of just wonderful fun, meeting great people and working on some terrific stories. And I'm thankful every day for the time I had in the industry,
Yeah,
and still having in the industry.
yeah, absolutely. And I feel that when we do look at your artwork and we there are some creators who I feel you can see that they've got that still youthful love for the characters they're drawing. They bring something to it that make you feel like the hero will still win the day. Even if your hero is getting poisoned by a symbiotic costume that's trying to consume him, you still feel hopeful.
Yeah.
It's just it comes through in your artwork, and I think that's I like to call them comfort comics. But when I read those, it's like this feels good. This feels I'm
Yeah,
good. Yeah,
you want the characters to be in jeopardy. You want the reader to feel jeopardy, but overall, it's an entertainment form. You want to entertain them. You want them to
right.
enjoy the experience. So yeah, I think hope should always be a part of it. The characters should always stand for something. I mean, they should be uh, evocative of where we would like to be, what we would like to do in any given situation, what we'd like to be able to do. Most of the characters I've been privileged enough to work on either already existed in that form or the ones that I've helped co-create. Uh, that's what we strive for, is that they're just regular people inside the superpowers and everything trying to do the right thing, which is all that we can hope for. That's the best we can hope to do.
Yeah, and
So
aspire to
yeah,
be.
we,
Yeah.
exactly. And we want it to be overall a positive experience. I'm old school in so many ways, Eric, but one of the ways I'm old school is that I think this form can get too violent. I think it can get too adult, and I think it starts to work against its very nature. The very nature of human beings putting on colorful costumes to symbolize something hopeful and fight crime can be at loggerheads with the more adult themes and the darker texture of trying to inject too much reality into a situation that is at its core a fantasy wish fulfillment thing. Whether it's for kids or adults, it's wish fulfillment. So why do you want your wish fulfillment to be that dark? I mean, I don't. But there's a fine balance to be found there.
Yeah, I
And
mean,
I think the best creators find that balance.
you're right. Yeah, I think you're right. There is a fine balance, and especially when you're working in that superhero genre, you can definitely go too dark where it's like there should be an entry point for young ones. People in the 10-year-old
Oh, absolutely.
range shouldn't be like, no, no, you shouldn't read this. It's not for you. Like, it's just one of those things that I always feel there are characters that should never be inappropriate for a young person to pick up. And when you take them to that place where
Well,
it's like,
yeah,
yeah, you don't need to do that.
I don't disagree with that. DeFalco and I have always strived to do truly all ages stuff. We don't talk down to our audience. We don't write for kids in any way. But the stuff I grew up reading, it was mass market. I mean, one of the reasons that the Marvel films have been so successful, it's the same reason that some real diehard comic fans have moments of resentment with the Marvel movies, is because they're trying to entertain the broadest possible audience.
That's true.
Okay. They're
Yep.
not talking, they're not preaching to the choir.
Yep.
They're trying to entertain as many people as possible, as at one time as possible. And quite frankly, up through the 80s, when I was working on the monthly books with Tom DeFalco and having such a great time on Thor and Spider-Girl and everything else, that's what we were trying to do. We were always trying, not to just do fan service and not just do what we think our fans will enjoy or the fans of that particular character will enjoy, but we try to tell stories that would appeal to the broadest possible audience. I mean, that's from back in the days of the spinner racks.
Yeah.
Are you even old enough to remember spinner racks in drugstores
I
before
am.
the advent of,
I
of just comic book stores? That kind of thing. So
Yeah, I'm 41. So I picked up my first comic books
okay,
in on the spinner racks. And one of them
yeah,
actually was the Superman annual that you and Roger Stern worked on. That was a childhood
there you
comic that
go. Yeah.
I remember just constantly flipping through because just the action in it was so
When I was a
fun.
kid, when going back to what I was talking about before, when I was a kid with my brother, my dad, our allowance was he would take us out. I think it was like on a Tuesday or a Wednesday. We would go to the business district near our house, and we would go to a Sun Drug, a newsstand, and a National Record Mart that all had spinner racks. And between those three places, we would buy. I mean, in the books at that point, when I started reading comics, they were 12 cents a piece. Then they went up to like 25 cents and 75 and on and on and on. But we could take our dad was willing to indulge our obsession, and he would pay for our comics for whatever chores we might have done around the house and all that. And we'd hit those three places. We'd buy a big stack of books for 25 cents a shot at the most, and go home and read them for the next week or month or whatever.
Dream.
And a lot of those books I still have. And the ones I don't still have, I've gone and rebought at back issue places and stuff. When they got too well loved and too well read, I have great fun going through back issue bins and finding books that were key memories for me as I was growing up, and re-enjoying them all over again. So it's wonderful.
That's the magic
and
of
to
it.
be anywhere near that kind of an experience for other people, remembering what the Romitas and John and Sal Buscema and Stan Lee and Roy Thomas and Tom Palmer, and I mean, I could just list names for a whole hour here. But Nick Carty, Kurt Swan, to be part of that kind of personal nostalgia for another generation of kids by just getting on a book and staying there for the duration and having fun telling stories and becoming a part of somebody's pleasant childhood memories is a gift. I mean, that it's humbling and it's flattering, and I never expected that. When you dream of doing it, you never consider the ridiculous situation where somebody's going to look at you the way you looked at John Romita Sr. or Sal Buscema or something, and that I got to work with those people.
Right.
Sal Buscema and I are friends. Joe Sinnott and I were friends. I've met John Romita Sr. I've had wonderful conversations with him. I've had the experience of being flattered by him. I've had the experience of being treated, get this, as an equal by these gentlemen that I grew up reading. That's crazy. That's,
to
nobody
you
gets that. Yeah, to me. I mean, nobody gets that. No, I have been living my dream as a kid.
Yeah, and
why wouldn't I want to come on podcasts and talk about it?
That's a real blessed life, but to share it, that's where it really matters, right? You shared your dream with the people the same way you had that experience as a kid. You paid it forward, as they say. So I was going to ask you, when did you know you wanted to draw? So that was clear as soon as your dad brought paper home, you were trying to recreate the comics.
I honestly do not remember a time when I didn't draw. And I honestly don't remember a time before, comic books and superhero cartoons being a part of my life. I mean, it just always has been. So, it's been a constant from day one.
Yeah.
I mean, it's weird. I remember me, just to drop some names.
Yeah.
I remember when I met Mark Silvestri, the great Mark Silvestri of Image Comics and everything. Of course, he started out like the rest of us working on one of the Spider-Man titles, and we met at a Spider-Man summit in New York. Wonderfully nice guy. And he had a completely different experience because he never indulged his clear talent when he was younger. And he told a story, and I might be getting some of the details wrong, but he told a story where he was like working at a gym, and one of the other guys was like drawing superheroes and things like that. And Mark looked at what he was doing and said, "Yeah, I used to play around with that a little bit when I was a kid." And he started drawing. and within a couple of years was working for Marvel Comics. So obviously the talent was in him latent. It was sitting there just not being utilized. And when he finally started to do it, it just caught fire, and he ended up doing it professionally and creating his own, part of his publishing house and all this kind of stuff. So, and it couldn't happen to a nicer guy. But we all come to it from different directions. We've all had different experiences. Meeting Brett Breeding, he grew up in a situation where his family wasn't aware of comics, wasn't into comics, and felt that his dream of working in comics was just a silly pipe dream, like a short kid wanting to be a famous basketball player or something. They never took him seriously. I had the opposite experience. My mom, God love her, very early on, when my grandmother, God love her as well, would see me drawing crazy characters and everything, and she'd go, well, if he has real talent, shouldn't he be painting fruit or covered bridges or scenery or something? And my mom, very wisely, I think, very insightfully, said, this is what he enjoys doing, and somebody has to be doing this for a living. Somebody is getting paid to produce these comic books.
Yeah, why not you?
So why not him? That kind of thing. So she was always very supportive. My dad was always very supportive. As I said, I had a brother 3 years older that was my first fan and was always very supportive of me.
That's great.
So, but that was very much the opposite of Brett Breeding's experience, where, he was fortunate enough at a fairly young age, as a young adult, to meet Dave Michelinie and Bob Layton,
Oh, wow.
who lived locally to him. And that helped make it real for him,
Right.
becoming Bob Layton's assistant, getting to know Dave Michelinie and getting the behind the scenes ideas of how these comic books are actually produced. And, he was actually in the industry before I was. By the time I was doing Spider-Man 252 as a fill-in and was told it was going to be inked by Brett Breeding, my friends and I had just seen Brett a year or two before work on the West Coast Avengers miniseries, which was like a big deal for all of us comics fans, with the new Avengers franchise and everything. And we're very impressed with his work. So I remember that being one of the times that all my comic fan friends said, "You're working with Brett Breeding. Whoa, like you've arrived." Brett hates when I tell that story, but it's true,
And you and him, I gotta say,
was,
you and him are him inking you is the tops. Like, I wish you guys did a extended run on anything.
I don't disagree.
Yeah,
I don't disagree. Brett has either been responsible for or present for most of the highlights of my career. I mean, right now, the 40 some years I've been in the industry, Eric, be as honest as you can. What are the things that come to mind when you think about, like you brought up that second annual, that second Superman annual, Roger Stern, it ain't that.
Yeah.
Spider-Man 252, first issue with the black costume.
Yeah.
Brett was there. Thor 390, when Steve Rogers picked up the hammer for
That's what I was gonna say next.
Okay?
That's the next one.
Brett was there for that. He inked that, and it was his idea. it was Brett's
so cool
thought. We were speaking at one point and talking about comic book stuff, and he said, Walt opened up the door to this whole, whosoever holds the hammer, if he be worthy,
right,
by using Beta Ray Bill and having somebody else be worthy. He's opened the door. And he said, when you think about it, who in the Marvel Universe would be more worthy than Steve Rogers? And I went, you're absolutely right. And I mentioned it to Tom DeFalco, and Tom and I were working on a story and where Thor was coming back to Earth after some time out and having cosmic adventures. And what was going on in the other books at that time was the Armor Wars, where Cap was, taking his shield back to Tony Stark and giving it back to him because he was the captain and he didn't want to be beholden to Tony because Tony was doing some crazy stuff, taking back his technology, blah, blah, blah. And Thor being, part of the big three with those two, we wanted a point of view for Thor. Where would Thor land in this whole thing? Iron Man's one of his oldest friends. from early on, he and Tony Stark, Don Blake and Tony Stark, were like the first Avengers to know each other's secret identity,
Right.
that kind of thing. But we also wanted him to come down on the side of Cap in this thing because Cap was right.
Hmm.
So what was a way to solve that conflict for the Thor character? And having Steve pick up the hammer at all, told Thor everything he needed to know about that conflict. So when Steve says, I need you to stay out of it, that was, that was the answer for Thor. It was a wonderful moment, and Brett handed it to us. So again, that's Thor 390. Brett was there. I mean, but a lot of those moments, the 3-part Celestial saga in Thor, when we first came on Thor, Brett was there for that. He did both the Superman annuals. He was the one that let Mike Carlin know that my contract with Marvel was running out when Thunderstrike was canceled, and that I was actually available, because Mike Carlin would never poach talent. He would never, if you were on a book and you were getting work, he would never contact you and try to lure you away or anything. But when Brett told him I was available, and I had done those 2 annuals for him a few years before, he invited me to come over to the Superman titles. And there you go. I mean, so Brett was there for that. And on and on and on. I mean, there's just A Next. He was there at the premiere of A Next for MC2. He actually is a huge figure, not just a great friend, but a huge figure in my professional life. So
Yeah,
no doubt about it.
just like I was gonna ask, just like Tom, you and Tom are famously known for being
Yeah.
a collaborative team that, there's a few duos that you come to mind of people who've worked together throughout their careers creatively. But for me, you and
Sure.
Tom, it's just one of those bands that when they get back together, they're gonna do what they do. And try, tested, and true, because you have the Spider-Man run, and then of course the Thor run, and then later on Spider-Girl again. What makes that relationship work so well with you guys?
The easy answer is the mutual respect of the situation. We learned early on when we first met in person, because he hired me on Marvel Team Up. He was the Spider-Man editor and the editor of Marvel Team Up. So the brief time where Spider-Man had guest starred in Kesar, which was my first regular gig for Marvel, and he saw the Spider-Man stuff and said, hey, he hasn't destroyed this character. Maybe we can offer him some other Spider-Man work, and we can, ease him in. And that's the way it's supposed to happen. So he hired me on Spider-Man. He was a very much of a teaching editor. So he let you know what he was looking for, and he let you know what he considered good comics, and so there was definitely a mentor type of an aspect to it. But with the first time we met in person at a convention, I believe it was here in Pittsburgh, along with Butch Geist, Jackson Geist, back when he was just Butch, working on Micronauts, I believe.
Wow.
So we sat over dinner and we talked about comic books. We talked about what kind of comics we enjoy, and he and I bonded over the late 60s, early 70s Marvel aesthetic, the Stan Lee, Roy Thomas melodrama, the bombastic action and the drama and the soap opera and all that. So we've always really enjoyed the same types of stories, the hoo-ha Marvel action, as Tom would say. And so when we got together on Spider-Man first as a creative team, we would just talk about the characters for hours on the phone. How we saw Pete from all the different writers that had handled him up to that point. We got a real firm idea of a mutual concept of who Peter Parker was as a character and who his supporting characters, how they interacted with him, how he felt about them, how he felt about what he does and what he doesn't do. And the stories would grow out of that, and of course, Tom also, as much as I wanted to jump in and do all the classic villains, Tom said, no, we're not at first. At first, we're going to create new stuff. We're going to create new situations and, tell classic types of stories, story structure and everything. but do it with all new characters so it'll feel fresh and new, and hopefully
Interesting.
people will enjoy it. And we were lucky enough that they did. So yeah, but it's checking your ego at the door. Tom is a very open to other people's ideas, and again, he has that element of the teacher in him. So if you pitch an idea and he doesn't think it works, he won't just say no, that doesn't work. He'll tell you why he thinks it doesn't work. As late as our partnership on Spider-Girl, because when Spider-Girl launched as her own title and I was doing A Next, Pat Olive came on board, made that book his own. He and Tom worked together for 3-4 years on that title before it got passed to me, which was a huge surprise to everybody. One, because we thought it was going to be canceled, and two, because once it was uncanceled, Pat was off doing other work, so I kind of got it by default. But my first couple of years on Spider-Girl, I was pitching broader MC2 ideas because I loved A Next and I loved all the other concepts and all the other characters in the MC2. And Tom would always kind of have to rein me in and say, that's kind of a neat idea, Ron, but how do we make that a Spider-Girl idea? The book is about May. It's about May Day, so we need to make it a Spider-Girl idea. And you get that. That makes perfect sense,
Right.
And so there was never we've never had any kind of a major creative conflict. Yeah, well, I mean, we've never had a major creative disagreement about anything, because I understand when Tom makes a decision, whether it's as an editor or as the writer or whatever, I understand why he made that decision. It's not just a decision because that's what he wanted to do. It's a decision that best served the story or best served the circumstance, whatever.
Is there a
At
longer
one point,
tag team than you
go
guys?
ahead.
'Cause you guys went from 84,
I don't
85
know.
to 95 with Thor. Like when you
I don't think so, but I'm not sure. I mean,
consecutively.
there were a lot. Well, Chris, yeah, I mean, Chris Claremont has worked with different artists for
He,
long periods of time because he was on the book,
he was
for a
on the
very
book.
long time with different artists. So I don't know if any one artist lasted as long with
Yeah.
Chris as Tom and I have. There have been other teams that I've really enjoyed,
Yes.
like
For sure. For sure.
when Mark Grunwald was working with Paul Ryan on Quasar.
Okay.
That
Yes.
felt like a team that had the kind of
Yeah, it was good
uh,
stuff.
shared brain that DeFalco and I have.
Okay.
And I'm sorry that couldn't last longer. But Tom has had that creative relationship with other people. I can't necessarily say I've ever had that creative a relationship with other creators, although before I worked with Tom, my partnership with Joe Duffy on Star Wars was every bit as productive, every bit as fun, every bit as collaborative, every bit as of a learning experience. I mean, Joe prepared me to be a better partner for Tom, because Joe again was very open to ideas, and she would, if she had a problem with anything you did or didn't agree with the way you handled a scene or anything, she would tell you.
Mhm.
And I've always been fortunate in that I don't get my back up. I don't immediately get defensive and feel like somebody is attacking me. I'm trying to learn. I'm trying to get better. And
Mhm.
certainly that early in my career, my attitude was all of that. Was just teach me, let me know. I'm a sponge. Tell me what I'm doing wrong. Joe, I did put Joe in a couple of situations where, she had to say,
Mhm.
that's not cool, that kind of thing. And helped make me a better collaborator and make me a better craftsman.
Mhm.
That only helped when I was teamed with DeFalco on Spider-Man. So that's been really the only the only creative partner I've had that has come close to that. But DeFalco has worked effectively and really, really well with Paul Ryan on Fantastic Four, with Ron Lim on various projects, with Pat Olliffe on Spider-Girl. I mean,
For sure.
Tom is Tom,
Yes,
and Tom is a very craft-oriented writer, and is very solid in his professionalism and the craft. He doesn't write stories. He writes stories that he would enjoy reading, but he writes them from just enough of a technical aspect that they hum.
right.
I mean,
They're gonna
he
work.
holds himself exactly. He holds himself to a very strict standard of how you express information to the reader and make everything clear to the reader so that they can. That's why he's so good at writing these long form mysteries,
Mm,
like who is the Hobgoblin or who was
mm,
Blood Axe,
mm.
or these gang war type stories that he does. That we did a long form one in Spider Girl that I thought was just a lot of fun. We did a long form thing with Eric Masterson and Thor, like
Mhm.
Where Was Thor? I don't think he literally has it, but he thinks like a person that has one of those vision boards with the strings connecting
Right, right,
everything and all
right.
this kind of stuff. And he knows when he is bringing something up in a story, he knows why he's doing it. He's timing it out perfectly so that the reader is getting the full effect of the drama building slowly towards the climax. And I mean, in that way, that's what I mean when I say he's a technical writer. He's a craft writer because he does all of that so skillfully that you don't even know he's doing it, and yet it pays off.
Right.
It pays off for the reader. And it's one of the things that I always notice in some of the more modern storytelling is nobody likes to write endings to stories anymore. The stories always roll into the next big epic. They're always afraid to give the reader a breather because they're afraid the reader won't come back, that kind of thing. We never had those kind of concerns back in the day because we were producing monthly adventures, and we were more comfortable with the serialization. But some of my favorite stories with DeFalco were endings,
Right.
were when you finally brought all the threads together, tied them up into a nice little
Yeah.
bow, and said, now you
And
can breathe for a second
right,
before we start the next thing. The
right.
end, that kind of thing. Like one of them was Thor 400. We were building towards that big epic War of the Gods thing, and 400 was a double-sized anniversary issue where it all came to a head, and we had the big battle, and it was like Avengers Endgame, but it
Right.
ended, and
Right.
that's not a bad thing. That's a
No.
good thing. That's what people are invested in.
Right.
I think one of the reasons that the perception has been that the Marvel movies haven't been as exciting since Endgame is just because Endgame was so exciting. It paid off the first 10 years of Marvel movies so well
Hmm.
that people are looking for that high. And you can't get that high unless you build towards it. You have to meet the creators halfway. You have to, there's a contract between the reader and the creative that you at least have to meet them halfway. If you're not interested, you're not interested, and walk away. That's fine.
Right.
It's the creative's job to entertain you, to keep you engaged. And
Sure.
if they can't, then they can't.
Yeah.
But I like the idea that the viewer is at least giving you the benefit of the doubt and is not coming to you with his laptop on his lap and his phone activated and only paying a third of attention. Engage, give us a chance, get to know, see if we can lure you in and get to know the characters, and maybe we can actually get you to care about these guys. And I mean, because it's crazy. It's comics especially, it's a flat two-dimensional image. I
Right.
mean, the fact that we were able to make anybody care about a guy named Eric Masterson it's alchemy. It's a magic trick.
It's true.
You
Yeah.
know, it's always been amazing to me that you can take five rabid Spider-Man fans. Okay, take five guys who know Peter Parker as a character better than anybody, and then ask him who should play him in a movie.
Mm.
Especially before there were 3 or 4 different Spider-Mans.
Right, right.
But, it always fascinated me as a young man before I went professional that you'd get 5 different answers.
Right.
I mean, I remember when I was a young guy and people were, before there ever was a Spider-Man movie. In fact, there might have been one Spider-Man, Nicholas Hammond, for the TV show, but when people would talk about Spider-Man in a movie, I remember one guy said Ray Liotta, a young Ray Liotta. Really? Ray Liotta. Okay. But then I thought a young Tom Hanks would have been a great Peter Parker.
Yeah, I can
I
see
mean,
that.
and people would look at me and go, "Are you out of your mind? The guy from Bosom Buddies?"
Yeah, yeah.
No, and so you can get into real debates about what people
Interesting.
are seeing,
Right.
what people are projecting into that 2-dimensional image, and they're bringing little pieces of themselves. They're
Sure.
bringing, the little things that Stan said or Steve Ditko said or
Sure.
John Romita said about that character that appealed to them.
Hmm.
And that's why when Tom and I had these conversations early on about Pete, that we were kind of bringing our 2 views together and deciding who Peter Parker was from our perceptions, from what we had read from the other
Right.
guys that did it. We didn't want to bring in anything of our own. We wanted to have a solid idea of who Peter Parker was established to have been by the writers that went before, and then put him through his paces and see where that led him. It's true. When you're working in these, just like with the fans, when you're working with these characters, you're having conversations with other adults that other adults probably shouldn't be having about fictional characters because they become very real to us.
Yeah.
They become our friends. I
Yeah.
mean, I know Eric Masterson. I know Kevin Masterson. These are people that they're pretty real to me because one, they're bits and pieces of DeFalco and they're bits and pieces of me. And
Yeah.
we've seen them at their worst and we've put them through hell. And
like most creators,
yeah,
they say that the character eventually, I remember JMD saying this, DeMatteis saying that the characters kind of tell you where it goes. Once you work with them
yeah.
and get to know them and you get in their head, we as fans, we often think like, why did you do that? And oftentimes it's like that was the natural course that the character was telling us they would go. And it feels
Tom
like that,
DeFalco is a huge, Tom DeFalco is a huge fan of Mark Damatis, a huge fan.
as am I.
But the one time Tom has talked about that because, like I said, Tom's a very technical writer. He's a very practical writer.
Right.
But the one time he said that the character told him something was when Mary Jane announced that she knew Peter Parker was Spider-Man. He was writing this scene at the end of the issue where Pete had to shove the Puma attacked Pete's apartment, and
Right.
he had to shove Mary Jane out the door, and he broke the door jamb to jam the door so Mary Jane couldn't get back in. He had the symbiotic costume at the time, so it flowed over him, and he fights the Puma and all this stuff, and he finally gets back to the apartment, and Mary Jane is frantic, and what the hell happened to you? She broke in through the door, and you went out the window, that kind of thing. And Pete's coming up with his next lie. And he's saying, who knows what he was going to say, probably that Spider-Man rescued him or something. But Tom says, I was sitting down there, I was writing that scene. Pete was going to come up with his next lie. And Mary Jane just said, don't lie, Peter. I know you're Spider-Man.
Classic.
And he claims that he just looked at the page and went, holy shit. and he called me on the phone and he said, what would you think if I told you that Mary Jane knows Peter Parker is Spider-Man? And from what I remember, I just kind of went, wow, how long has she known? And Tom said, let's not worry about that right now. How do you feel about the fact that she figured it out? She knows. I said, I have no problem with that. I mean, I'm running, I started running my fan memory there of all the different interactions, not of Pete and Mary Jane, but of Spider-Man and Mary Jane.
Got it.
And I started running my Rolodex as quick as I could. And I said, Tom, I'm not coming up with anything that flat out directly contradicts that.
Mm.
Especially given that Mary Jane is an actress. We were on the verge of exploring Mary Jane's character and exploring that whole theme of masks and why Mary Jane is the way she is,
Mm-hmm.
because through the Jerry Conway stories, it was obvious that Pete cares about her.
Right.
Pete fell in love with this woman, and she can't just be a flighty party girl if a guy like Peter Parker fell for her.
He sees past
So
it.
we needed to explain her behavior in a way that didn't make her a shallow ditz, but gave her a backstory that explained, why she puts up walls and why she keeps people at a distance and all this kind of stuff, which, works into the theme of masks perfectly with Peter Parker and his double life and all that kind of stuff.
Right.
So, we were on the verge of exploring that, and this gave us the perfect end, of exploring that. But that's the one time I can remember Tom actually saying that the character got up off the page and said, "I know he's Spider-Man."
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
Tom went, "Wow, let's run with it,"
Yeah.
that kind of thing. But it absolutely does happen. Yeah.
That was one of my favorite things on your time on Spider-Man was bringing Mary Jane back into the main fold of supporting cast characters. I've always been a fan of their relationship, whether they're married or not. Thank you guys for doing that. I appreciate that aspect of having Peter have a trusted confidant that he could
Yeah.
depend upon to like, don't worry, I got your back. I'm scared for you, but I have this love for you, just like a family member would. Knowing he has that is always
Yeah.
better
And
when a character can go that way.
no, I'm glad you feel that way, Eric. I see. I was I liked the idea too. I loved the Jerry Conway work with everybody, but the stuff that Jerry Conway did and Marv Wolfman did with Ross Andrew and Keith Pollard, and where they explored their friendship and their relationship. Tom and I never really meant we weren't really heading them towards marriage, but what I liked about their friendship and what I liked about her knowing is that one of the aspects, and believe me, I'm not trying to say anything too deep about myself, but one of the aspects of Peter Parker as a character that I've always related to is his loneliness.
Hmm.
Is that, being Spider-Man didn't bring him fame and fortune. It brings him isolation. And by having Mary Jane know, but at first being uncomfortable with knowing, really brought home the tragedy of, okay, here's somebody that Pete could possibly talk to about, and ultimately could once they were married and all that, which I think worked great for the character.
I do too.
But when we were playing with it early on, you go, hey, yay, somebody knows there's somebody I don't need to lie to about this, except she's very uncomfortable with it. As you were pointing out, you're risking your life. I'm not crazy about that. There's parts of it that scare the crap out of me. So she really wasn't open to him talking about it a lot. There was that one scene we did, I think it was in issue 275. It was one of the first times that I actually suggested a scene to DeFalco, because we were going to recap the origin because it was an anniversary issue. So we were going to use him telling Mary Jane as a way to recap the origin. Originally, in our discussion and in Tom's plot, it was just, they're walking into the subway and Mary Jane says, ever since I told you I've known you're Spider-Man, we've never really talked about how you became Spider-Man. And in the plot, it just said, so Pete tells her. And I said, can I have a couple of panels here? And he said, yeah, what? I said, I think it would be a very natural reaction for Pete to say, yeah, you haven't asked because you didn't want to know. I mean, you announced you knew and then you ran,
Right.
and then you came back and then you said, it's hard for you to deal with the fact that I risk my life, but, we're friends. We care about each other. But yeah, you never asked.
Right.
he was thinking about quitting at that time. He says, well, now you don't have to worry about it, and he walked away from her. And it gave Mary Jane one of those wonderful moments that are very character defining, where instead of going away in a huff or being angry back at him, she walks over and she says, "You're right. I'm asking now." It still chokes me up. And then, of course, there was a beautiful decision made to just reprint Ditko and Lee's original origin story, which I was so happy about that. Just recently on my Facebook page, I actually showed the unused pencils of.
Oh, really?
We were going to do like a 1-page, 6-panel recap of his origin, and then somebody said, "Well, wait a minute, it's an anniversary issue. How about if we just add the extra pages and we do?" Because the original story was what, like, I don't know, 10 or 15 pages, I think,
Yeah,
or something.
not that long. Yeah.
It wasn't a full 20 pages or anything. So, see, these stories still get to me, Eric.
No,
This
but
is
that's the beauty of it, because it means something to you and it comes through in the
yeah.
work.
I mean,
Because nowadays you like you said before, I can't keep up with modern Marvel comics, not because I don't think any of them are good. It's just the stories that were told from your generation of creators that are now being collected for us. There's a lot of gaps we have in our collection where now we get to read them, and it's rediscovering. Like, we did an episode last week where it was Spidey in the 80s, and we listed our top 10 recommendations. And everybody in the comments were just saying how fond they were of that time on of the character, because all of the creators approached it with a respect for the character as well as their partner that they were working with, Roger Stern and John Romita. Then it's passed to you and Tom. Even though it's a different creative team, it's the same character and it's the same story carrying on. You don't feel like it's a jarring change as much as you guys get onto the book and Spider-Man's got a brand new costume and nobody knows why. Like, you still made it feel like home.
well,
So
that was very important. Well, there's two things that would be great to add at this point in the conversation,
yes,
because you
please
brought that
do.
up. DeFalco at one point did a book called "Comic Creators on the Amazing Spider-Man." He did a series of books, I think, for Titan Books over in
That's
England.
cool.
He did one for comic creators on the Fantastic Four, comic creators on the X-Men, and he interviewed a whole bunch of different people that worked
That's so
over,
cool.
in the whole run of the books, different creators. And in the Spider-Man one, he Stan Lee, he interviewed Jerry Conway, he interviewed probably Roy Thomas, although he didn't write a lot of Spider-Man, Marv Wolfman, all the way up through at the time the book was published, J. Michael Straczynski was writing Spider-Man, right? And there is a line that you're talking about. Might have been a little later than the 80s, but not by much. But when Tom was interviewing Marv Wolfman, Jerry Conway, and of course himself,
Hmm.
it was all about finding Peter Parker's voice. It was all about having those conversations that I was talking about that Tom and I would have, where you read all of the material up to that point and you decide, who this character is based on how he's behaved and what's been told about him and all that kind of stuff. So you're trying to find Peter Parker's voice as created by Stan Lee and Steve Ditko and all the writers that came before. Okay. But then there is a Terminator line, sometime after Marv Wolfman, somewhere into the, some of the more modern writers, where the goal became for them to write their Peter Parker.
Yes. Yes, that's right.
And to put their stamp on
Yes.
Peter Parker and on Spider-Man.
Yes.
Those are two very distinct and different approaches
Yes.
to writing a character. And that's exactly what you were just talking about. So it's a very real thing.
Yeah.
It is a difference in approach. It's a difference in editorial attitude.
Hmm.
It's a loosening of editorial standards, where they want to be riskier. They want to bring in more, and I do believe that the character needs to evolve. I mean, if Pete is
Absolutely.
going to stay, if Pete is going to stay in his mid-20s, he has to reflect what a mid-20s guy is in whatever age he's being published in,
Sure.
and not stay the guy in the yellow sweater and the red tie and the white shirt. So we agree on that. But you're right. There is definitely a difference between finding the character's voice as established and making your mark on your Peter Parker. Two completely different things.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean that's a very real thing. It is a different attitude, and it's reflected in the fact that the new team gets to do a new number one.
Always.
I
Yeah.
I don't know if you've ever been to my Facebook page, but one of the things I take great pride in, it's false pride, but it's great pride, is that I worked on Spider-Man Volume 1. I
Yeah.
worked on Thor Volume 1.
That's very
And I
cool.
like to point that out because when I go looking for, fill-ins that I did on different titles, I have to find what volume it was. I mean, by the time I got to Superman, it was volume 2. It was Byrne's relaunch. God only knows what the volume is now. I have no idea. But they're doing a new volume of Fantastic Four. I have no idea what it is, but they're doing a new relaunch of Fantastic Four #1 again.
Yeah,
So
exactly.
it's crazy. And
It's hard to get into comics that way. And I think going back to
I,
the going back to
they
the
apparently
MCU.
think the opposite. They apparently
Yeah.
think that means that's a great time to jump on. I
Yeah.
remember the last time I entertained, I went into a comic shop and I bought a bunch of new comics. And in the back of one of the comics I bought was an interview. Oh my God, I don't even remember who the writer was. Remember when they did the relaunch of Fantastic Four that Brian Hitch was the artist on it?
Okay.
Uh,
I
do you
wasn't
remember who
following
the
it at the
writer was
time.
on that?
I think it was Mark Miller.
I think you're right.
Yeah.
And I remember reading some articles in the back of all the Marvel books about what their approach was going to be and all this kind of stuff. And I went, well, that's interesting. It doesn't sound like the characters I knew, but it sounds interesting. So I went back into the comic store from my car. I was reading some of these books in my car. I went back into the comic store and I said, do you have a couple of the new issues of that Fantastic Four run? And they did. So I bought them and I came out, and Brian Hitch can draw like nobody's business. No doubt about that. Mark Miller is one of my, or Millar, however we pronounce it.
Miller. I think it's
When
Miller.
he wrote Superman Adventures over at DC, they were some of my favorite Superman stories being done at the time. Seriously. So I think he's a terrific writer. But I did not recognize these characters at all.
Yeah.
I mean, women were coming onto the thing. Ben was a ladies' man. Reed was called Mr. Fantastic because he was the smartest, the handsomest, the coolest. And I'm going, what? Johnny Storm was kind of Paris Hilton. He was going to start his own band, and he was all obsessed with social media and all this. And I'm like, what? I mean, I did not follow it. I mean, I didn't follow it from that. That's just my personal opinion.
Sure.
There's no way of criticism of the creatives, because I'm sure it sold better than a lot of the stuff that I work on. But it really is one of those situations where even the companies, even the publishers are saying, okay, we're handing the character to you. Please don't break our toys, but we're giving you wide latitude. I mean, nobody could believe the latitude that DC gave John Byrne to recreate Superman, to do the relaunch that Byrne did of Superman. Then of course he tried it on Spider-Man and it didn't go quite as well.
It didn't go quite as well. I like the Superman reboot, but not the Spider-Man one.
I mean, a lot of people love the Superman reboot because it knocked a lot of dust off of it. And I mean, one of my favorite things of all the things that he did, one of my favorites was keeping Ma and Pa Ken alive.
That's the reason. That's the reason I like it. It's the same thing for me.
I mean, that was one of the things that really stuck of that with me. It was weird coming in because I did that Superman annual, that first Superman annual of that run.
Right.
It was of the relaunch. It was Superman annual #1 with the Titano story. It was odd
that issue
because. Thank you. It was a lot of fun. I thought Byrne only did like a 2-paragraph synopsis because he was writing everything. He was writing both Superman titles, and I think he was writing whatever the Superman team up book was,
Yeah.
and all this
Action
kind of stuff.
Comics,
And
Superman, drawing them.
right,
Yeah.
right. It was crazy. I mean, I think Marv Wolfman might have been doing one. I don't know if he was even
He
doing it at
was he
first.
was
I'm
doing
not. I don't remember.
adventures at the time. Yeah, you're right.
But I remember he did like a 2-paragraph synopsis for an annual size story for like a 30 some page story. And Mike Carlin, I said, this is my first crack at Superman. I'm not sure I'm up for this. And he goes, okay, let me go talk to John Byrne. And he did. And he came back and he said, okay, Ron, here's what we're going to do. John is tied up in all kinds of other things. He's not really interested in giving you more. He said, so you and I are going to sit down and we're going to break this. We're going to read the synopsis and we're going to break it down. And I said, Mike, you're a lifesaver. Thank you. That's wonderful. Because technically that's what an editor does.
Absolutely.
He very much, I think he even gave me a co-plotting credit in there because he and I sat and broke it down. He didn't take any credit for himself because he's the editor, but we broke it down. And I thought it ended up being a wonderful, wonderful story. Up to this day, I'm very, very proud to be a part of it. And I thought John Byrne did an incredible job on the script.
Yeah.
But what was weird about working on it was even Byrne was playing fast and loose with, well, is this Superman? Is this the Superman we've always known? Or is this a completely different character?
Right.
And the attitude was kind of yes and no.
Right.
Because the way John was doing it was, he did the Man of Steel miniseries and he reestablished different relationships with Luthor and he reestablished the Smallville history, and there was no Superboy and blah, blah, blah. But when it came to what's happened before, he was unwilling to commit because he wanted to keep his options open. Yeah. If he wanted to retell a story, if he wanted to do a new version of Lori Lemaris,
right,
he wanted the option to do that. Superman was the character you always knew until John told you he wasn't.
Right.
Which is why when he executed the Kryptonian criminals, everybody went apeshit because everybody was assuming up to that point that this was just Superman and he had his code against killing and all that kind of stuff. But what they weren't grasping at the time was that this is Superman's origin of his code against killing.
Yes.
This is him realizing that he can't do that. And Byrne left the title shortly thereafter.
Yeah.
And the guys who took over under Carlin did a fantastic job of exploring the PTSD of what he had done, because he exiled himself out into space. Beautiful stories. Yeah. Beautiful story. So, again, that's that whole, the audience meeting the creative halfway,
Yes.
Because you have to be willing to let these guys tell their stories. And we look back on it now and it was just an incredibly wonderful period of time. But I remember at the time, everybody ranting about how, Byrne doesn't get Superman and why, this is heresy, that kind of thing. But see, what was interesting was DeFalco and I got the same thing when we did Eric Masterson. When Eric Masterson took over as Thor, we had already been on Thor for like 5 years, 4 or 5 years.
It was a while,
and everybody that was still reading the book was enjoying what we were doing. But then we had Eric take over as Thor, and we were getting letters saying, "You guys don't understand Thor. You have no idea what this character is all about." And it's like, you've been here for the last 3-4 years with us. What are you talking about?
Us. Yeah.
Just let us tell our story because we're going to tell you how wonderful Thor is by having him step off stage for a little while and having Eric try to live up to him and look for him, But when we did that cover, No More Mr. Nice God, where we kind of did the little spoof of Image Comics where Thor was holding a big gun and firing a big gun on the cover and all this, the fans had no sense of humor about it at all. Well, a couple of times we've overestimated a fan's sense of humor because the fans are very protective, as they should be, of their favorite characters.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
what's interesting to me is how quickly they can even turn on the creatives that have been there with them this whole time when they perceive an insult or an affront, because that was one. The No More Mr. Nice God cover was one. I'm trying to. Oh, one other time on Thunderstrike, it was just a joke because Venom was very, very popular at the time, and everybody was shoving Venom down your throat.
Yeah.
There were new miniseries, and he was like the biggest thing in comics at the time. So it was like an early issue of Thunderstrike where we wanted to guest star Spider-Man because,
Yeah. Why not?
everybody gets to guest star Spider-Man like around the third or fourth issue or
You
something
have
like
to.
that.
Yeah. Rite of
And we were going to
passage.
bring in Spider, but I thought would be a funny little joke. It was Thunderstrike. It was like issue 4 or 5 or something like that. And on the cover it said, "From the pages of Venom, the Amazing Spider-Man," and it was just a little gag. I mean, come on. People got really angry. We got some really angry mail about that.
Imagine if they had cell phones
So,
back then to complain about it.
oh man,
Fandom
thank
has always
God
been
social media
crazy.
wasn't a thing yet. Yeah, we would have been fried on social media. But anyway,
When we listed our issues last week, or our favorite stories of Spider-Man in the 80s, one of them that I left out on purpose because I wanted to talk to you about it today was issue 248, where before you jump on as the main artist, you and Roger Stern tell what many consider to be the greatest Spider-Man story of all time on many lists. We can argue about it if we want, but it's
well, the
definitely
fact
in
that
the.
it wasn't on your list because you were saving it hurts my feelings, Eric. I'm very, very hurt.
Well, I said I'm gonna specifically talk about it because it is something that a lot of Spidey fans hold near and dear to their heart because it is such an endearing, um, loving story. When you were given
Yeah,
that assignment, can you just tell us about your reaction to the script and just what it made you feel?
sure.
Yeah.
It was during the transition where DeFalco was giving up the editorship of the Spider-Man titles and handing it over to Danny Fingeroth. The other half of the story was the continuation of the Thunderball fight, and Tom was planning on having Ramita Jr. finish up the Thunderball fight, and he was going to give me the Kid Who Collects Spider-Man, but he wasn't sure what Danny was going to do. He said the final decision is Danny's, but I wanted to give you a heads up, and I said, okay, well, I mean, either way, I was either going to get to do the Kid Who Collects Spider-Man or I was going to get to do a big Thunderball fight. So, I was fine either way. So Danny did say, yeah, okay, we're going to give you this one, Kid Who Collects Spider-Man. He sent me the script. Roger does all his own research and sends you Xeroxes of all the flashback reference you need and all this. And part of the plot was the Jake Conover newspaper clippings and stuff, and it blew me away. It was just fantastic. When you read a plot like that, if you're normal, okay. I mean, I'm sure there are some creatives that would say, "This is my moment," or something like that. My reaction was, I need to stay the hell out of the way because this story is really, really special. I just have to make sure I don't screw it up. This was all pre-McFarlane, again, remember. And as I read the story, I mean, there's no superhero action in it.
Right.
It's Pete in costume talking to this kid for the 11 pages. I had already been playing with looking at Ditko even on my Marvel team up stuff
Hmm.
because anytime I get a chance to work on a character, I go back to the roots of the character and look at the first people who created the character to try to find where they came from. So I'm not just the next guy in a long line of game of telephone,
Right.
with the character. So I wanted to do this Ditko thing. If he was just going to be standing and sitting in the room talking to the kid, I still wanted him to be Spider-Man. So I felt the best way to do that was to look at Ditko and early Ditko and all the run Ditko and make sure that when he's just standing there, he's standing like Spider-Man. He's not just standing like an action figure in the suit, but he has that Ditko attitude. He has the Ditko hips and the Ditko shoulders and the whole bit. So there are a couple of direct swipes from Ditko in that story, and that was my approach. But again, this was pre-McFarlane, And the Romita standard was very, very strong, especially just
Yeah.
coming off of J.R. Jr.
Right.
and coming off issues that John Senior had even inked a few issues over his kid. So, the Spider-Man standard had been Ditko, hadn't been Ditko in years. It had been Romita for years. Now, Pollard used Ditko and did some Ditko swipes, and Buckler did Ditko swipes. I wasn't the first guy to go back to Ditko when it came to Spider-Man. I get weird credit for that sometimes, and that is not the case
I've
because
given you credit for that actually.
no, because Pollard, if you go back and look through Pollard's run with Marv Wolfman, and he did a lot of Ditko swipes, and Buckler on Spectacular Spider-Man did a lot of Ditko swipes. So I was not the first guy to do that, but what I did do in the course of this story, because I just thought I wanted to embrace the Ditko. There's even like a side shot, a profile shot of Spider-Man where I did the reverse webbing that almost looks like a flower that Ditko
Right.
would do every once in a while,
Right.
because Ditko did not in any way worry about the webbing always being consistent at all. I mean, he would do the webbing however he felt like it to make it look good in that shot.
Right.
He
Right.
didn't
Right.
worry about it always pointing the same direction or not or whatever. So I actually did that in the course of the story. I did it a couple times, and pre-McFarlane, Danny Fingeroth was very uncomfortable with it. He wasn't sure that it was going to fly. He told me
Interesting.
because he's that kind of an editor. He said, "Ron, I don't know how I feel about this. I don't know if I'm comfortable with this. We may have Terry Austin fix it." And I said, "Danny, it's got to be your call, but these are the roots of the character. This is why I did it." And I explained to him why I did it. And I said, "But obviously it's your job to decide those things." So, and to his credit, he left it, and he just had Terry Austin ink it the way it was there. Terry Austin did a fantastic job. Everybody on that worked on that. Christy Shield, the colorist, Joe Rosen, the letterer, the production people that put in the clippings from the article. I mean, everybody was A game. I
Yeah.
mean, they all made me look so good. Roger's story is fantastic. So, I mean, it all just came together. Sometimes it's just mad. Sometimes the magic works.
Yeah.
Sometimes it just works. So to this day, it's something I'm very, very, very proud to have been a part of. And, I don't think it had any bearing on, I mean, it put me in the office, and, a lot of people think that I was just, that Tom and I were hired as the new team to line up with the new costume. And it was this big launch, and it could have even been a new #1 or some ridiculousness like that. None of that is true. The 252 was plotted by Roger Stern before he left. Tom was just coming in as a fill-in scripter. I was hired to do 251, 252, and like 6 more issues while John Romita Jr. went to get X-Men on schedule. And then he was going to come back and do Spider-Man and X-Men.
Wow.
Okay.
Magic.
That was the plan.
Yeah.
So I mean, and so I was hired to do like a 6-month stint on Spider-Man.
Okay.
And now at that time, I was still working at the animation studio here in town. So that was okay. They're giving me 6 months of Spider-Man. I'm getting regular work. I had already been regular on Star Wars. I had been regular on Kesar. And I was sort of kind of regular on Team Up before it turned into this 6-month stint on Spider-Man. So I did make the decision to leave the animation studio because Marvel's giving me regular work now. So
yeah, the dream is
I'm
alive.
going to take a shot.
Yeah.
I'm going to take a shot at going full time with Marvel, and I did, and never regretted it, fortunately. But yeah, I mean, 252 was fill-in guys. Brent was not the regular inker. I wasn't the regular penciler. And what happened was a few issues in, because if you remember, we did 251, 252. Then Rick Leonardi did 253, 254 with DeFalco.
Okay.
And somewhere in there, as Tom and I started our regular, our short run with 255, somewhere in there, I was told this story by Romita Jr. and I was told this story by Danny Fingeroth, that JR came into the office and was asking how things were going on Spider-Man. And Danny Fingeroth said, it's going fine. John, everything's going great. I'm happy with these guys, but the plan is still the plan, right? You're coming back when you get X-Men on schedule. And he goes, yeah. He says, yeah, I guess it's a lot of work. And he goes, yeah, I bet it is. He said, you seem to be really happy with DeFalco and Frenz. And he goes, yeah, I think they're gelling as a team, but we'll stick with the deal. JR just said, just let them have it. If you're happy with what they're doing, let them stay on Spider-Man. I got plenty to do over on X-Men. I'm going to go do X-Men. So the first time I met John Romita Jr. at a show, I thanked him for my run on Spider-Man because he gave me the nod.
That's beautiful.
That's class. So anyway, that turned into our 2.5 years on Spider-Man. Danny Fingeroth didn't stick around. He ended up moving on to he wanted to go freelance writing. So he did. And the book was given to a new editor and things did not go as smoothly. And ultimately Tom and I were removed from the title, and that's ancient history. But if you have any other questions, I'll be happy to answer them. That's the story of the kid who collects Spider-Man.
Yeah.
And to this day, that still chokes me up. I mean, that scene with Mary Jane chokes me up. Kid who collects Spider-Man chokes me up. I can't read the last issue of Thunderstrike without choking up. There are other scenes in the course of Thor and Thunderstrike that I read that still choke me up because I remember, putting the scene together with DeFalco and you have to not be afraid to do melodrama, to do soap opera, and nobody does it better than DeFalco. And when you love these characters, I mean, we just a few years back, we did a 10-page Spider-Man story it was a one-shot called Spider-Man Self-Improvement. And again, it was one of these, Tom had an idea, a theme that he wanted to pursue. He wrote a beautiful 11-page story that just nailed it. And it was a chance for much in the same vein as The Kid Who Collects Spider-Man. It was a wonderful Peter Parker story. He's in costume the whole time, but it's the story itself revolves around Peter Parker's humanity. And those are the best stories. The best stories are when you see the person inside the superhero suit, that it's not just action figures bouncing off each other, that kind of thing. And those are the kind of stories that we really enjoy doing when we have the opportunity to do them. I do want to mention that coming this summer, in July, there are 2 things coming out from Marvel starting this month. There's a book, an anthology book coming out called Fantastic Four Fanfare. It's already been solicited up through the 2nd or 3rd issue has already been solicited. It's going to run May, June, July, and August, 4 issues. It's going to come out around the time that the movie comes out and all that, because it's a celebration of Fantastic Four. And in issue 3, there is going to be a 10-page story by Tom DeFalco and me and Brett Breeding. And it's going to star The Thing. And so I don't know who's going to be in the issue with us because it's only going to be half the issue. But that's coming out in July. And I've already shown some preview pencil art on my Facebook page. But I'm going to be showing more teasers as the book starts coming out. I've seen the coloring and it's progressing. I haven't seen the lettered pages yet, but I saw the script by DeFalco, and it's a terrific, tight 10-page Ben Grimm. If you like Ben Grimm, if you like The Thing, if you like the Fantastic Four, DeFalco is Ben Grimm. He loves that character. He understands that character like nobody's business. So it's a really, really terrific story. I had fun doing that. And also in July, I was asked by the same office, Tom Brevoort's office, who have just recently taken over the X-Men titles. I'm doing a a retro variant cover for X-Men, God knows what volume, as we were talking about, but whatever volume it is, issue 17, it's out in July.
Nice.
Brett Breeding and I did a cover for them. And so that's, they're doing something called retro variant covers where they want them to feel like the 70s. And between you, me, and the lamppost, what that means operationally is that it reflects what the story is. Because you know how now covers, a lot of them are just pin-uppy covers, and
Yeah, yeah.
they don't necessarily show you the drama of what's happening in the story. They're not previews of what's in the story. But back in the day, we always did covers that showed you what the story was.
Is it issue
So
258 with the
that's what they
costumes
want.
pulling Peter apart? I love that cover. Is it issue
Well,
258?
we were always going for that because that we still had newsstand sales at the time.
Yeah.
Everything wasn't pre-ordered through the
Yeah.
catalog. You actually were trying to grab eyes off the newsstand.
Great
And
covers.
so when they asked me about doing this retro cover, I said, well, if it's going to be a retro cover, then I need to know something about the story. So they told me in general what the story was about. So I tried to do something that was, very much symbolic of what the story was about, and they were happy with the sketch and they approved it, and I did the sketch. So I'm hoping it's going to have like the 70s X-Men logo, which is still pretty much what the X-Men logo is anyway.
Yeah, yeah.
But I guess it's probably going to have trade dress and everything to look more like the 70s.
You're the right
But
man
it's
for the
the new
job.
X-Men. It's the X-Men team from the new relaunch. So it was fun, and it was yet another opportunity for me to work with Brett Breeding.
Perfect.
So keep an eye on my Facebook page, because as soon as I have permission, I'll show the artwork and stuff. As soon as
Absolutely.
it's solicited, I'll show the artwork. And as soon as we have a better idea, like as this thing story comes out, I've made scans of the thumbnails and the pencils and the inks and the colors, and I'm probably going to do some posts that they're going to show the process, the creative process, of plotting the thumbnails to the whole bit, because it's a nice little tight 10-page story that we can kind of show the work process,
Right.
So, I mean, every once in a while, I mean, in the last few years, we did a 10-page Thunderstrike story. We did a 10-page Spider-Man story. We did a 10-page, 10 or 11-page Enchantress story for an anniversary issue of Thor. And we've done this Thing story. So every once in a while, Marvel calls and says, you guys interested in throwing something out there? And we always are. Any opportunity to work with DeFalco is a great, great pleasure. Plus, I'm also still working for Sit Comics and doing Blue Baron and working on Heroes Union. So, I'm still active. I'll admit, a lot of my time is taken up with commissions through catskillcomics.com, but that doesn't take me away from the storytelling for Sit Comics and for Marvel stuff. So, and I still love to be approached. Even through Catskill, I've done some covers for independent publishers and stuff, and I love dealing with some of these new characters and everything, and it's always a lot of fun. So I'm just the luckiest guy in the world, Eric.
Yeah.
Sometimes I'm getting older now, so
You still look good,
I feel
Ron,
my age.
and your work is still
Thanks.
fresh. No, it's true.
I just turned 60. I just turned 65, Eric.
Happy birthday.
In February, I turned 65.
Oh, yes.
So I had to go on Medicare.
Our birthdays are close to each other. I'm 6th, February 6th. So I think
you're the 6th? Okay, yeah.
we're close.
You're still an Aquarian, right?
Yes, that's right. I am.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. So, that's why we vibe.
That's right. Absolutely. We connect on.
That's why we read, Eric.
I'm gonna wrap it up here. Everybody, thank you for listening to this episode. We hope you enjoyed it. Ron, I hope you come back because you're a wonderful orator telling stories. Like you answered all my questions that I had written without me having to ask them. So I appreciate that. There's just one more topic I wanna be able to delve into a little bit just as a fan. And I know the fans that that listen to the show would appreciate it as well. But everybody who's listened and watched on YouTube or on your podcast platform, we appreciate it. Give us a thumbs up. Don't forget to follow Ron on Facebook and social media platforms. Keep an eye out on his work, catskillcomics.com for commissions, and Omniverse Comics.guide for all of our interviews, our reading orders, collector item specials, etc., etc. And now that you're at the end of this episode, I'm going to send a special podcast shout out to Comic Shenanigans, my pal Adam Chapman. If you want the most in-depth review of Ron Frenz's career, that is the best place to listen to
Yeah.
Tom and Ron go into all aspects of their creative works together. Adam is probably the best documenter of Ron Frenz's career. I hope he comes back on this show to give us more intel, but check out those episodes because they're gold. Ron, thank you again. I bid you adieu.
My pleasure, Eric. Thank you very much, man. And to your viewers, as Tom DeFalco would say, thanks for being there.